Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. This week, a political aftershock is being felt across the United States. In the first major local election since President Trump began his second term, Democrats delivered sweeping victories, taking control in key battlegrounds such as New York, Virginia, and New Jersey. The elections brought historic firsts, including New York's first Muslim mayor and Virginia's first female governor. Meanwhile, after some 40 days, the federal government shutdown, the longest in U.S. history, has finally begun moving toward a resolution. But the political damage and public frustration may be far from over, with both parties now recalibrating ahead of next year's high-stakes midterms. So for a closer look into the situation, we are joined in the studio by Min Jung-hun, professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. Welcome.
Thank you for having me today.
And also joining us from Washington, D.C. is journalist Chris Casquejo. Good to see you again, Chris.
Good to be with you.
So let's start a discussion, of course, with the results of the major local elections since, President Trump began his second term. So the Democrats delivered a sweeping victory there. Chris, tell us, how are the results being interpreted locally in the United States, and how are both parties reacting to this?
Right, let's talk about three states, Virginia, New Jersey, and California. In Virginia, former Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger easily won the governor's race with a message focused on affordability. And of course, the state of Virginia here in the U.S. is home to hundreds of thousands of federal workers who have lost their jobs early in the first year here of the second Trump administration. Now, in New Jersey, former Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill also won handily with strong support from Latino and suburban voters who are concerned about affordability and health care. In California, voters approved Proposition 50, which was a statewide measure to redraw congressional maps in favor of Democrats to counter similar efforts in Texas, which is seen as part of the same wave of backlash and organization against, the Republican agenda. Across the board, voters prioritize cost of living over culture war issues, which is a break from what happened in 2024. And while Trump wasn't on the ballot, his influence did loom large. Analysts say these results might reflect growing voter pushback against the broader GOP agenda. Now, Democrats see some momentum heading into next year, 2026, especially in California. Gavin Newsom's efforts to get Proposition 50 on the ballot. He raised over $100 million and employed an organized network to get this vote out in a very quick manner. But U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson dismissed the results, saying blue states and cities voted blue, which was not a surprise.
So those results definitely seem to be an early indicator of where the public stands over there. So Chris there in Washington, D.C. gave us a very good recap of the results of the latest election. Professor Min, I wonder, were the results in line with what you've expected?
Yes, it went well with my expectations. The three states have been the blue states where Democrats usually dominate the outcome of the elections. But even if the election results were predictable, but the Democratic Party's victory in the elections is absolutely good news for them. Since their defeat in the presidential election last year, the Democratic Party, has been struggling to mobilize supporters due to the lack of leadership. And Democratic supporters are hoping this victory will spark a revival of the party. In particular, they expect that the emergence of Zohran Mamdani, a young Muslim, the New York mayor, will bring a breath of fresh air to American politics. But however, it remains to be seen whether this victory will last until the midterm election next year. That's mainly because it's still left 1 year to go. And so we don't know what will actually happen during that period of time. In addition, it's also uncertain whether a radical progressive or left-wing politician or social democrats like the Zohran Mamdani will be able to lead the big Democratic Party to win the midterm election as an alternative. And it's unclear whether he can receive support from moderate Democrats and independents, because many people think that he is a little bit far left or something like that. So we'll see what will actually happen in the coming months.
So, as our Professor Min pointed out, Zoran Mamdani. So now that brings us to the question, who is this figure? Who really became the youngest, first Muslim mayor of New York? Chris, do tell us, for our viewers, who is this figure and how are local media outlets reacting to this victory?
Well, it's been a spectacular rise to power as the mayor of the largest city in the U.S. for 34-year-old Zoran Mamdani, who was a little-known state assemblyman a little more than a year ago when he first announced his candidacy for U.S. mayor, or for mayor of New York City. He is New York City's first Muslim mayor. He's 34 years old. His platform was mainly on rent freezes, free public transit, and higher taxes on the wealthy. So very progressive viewpoints in line with Democratic Socialists, which Mamdani is, like U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont. Now, Mamdani built a coalition of young immigrant and working class voters, particularly in the New York City boroughs of Queens and the Bronx. Now, local media are calling his win a generational shift toward bold, economic-focused progressivism, but not everyone's cheering. Moderate Democrats are wary of Mamdani and his platform, and so are some of the major businesses that have presences in New York City. Naturally, Republicans are seizing on his image, branding Mamdani as the face of a radical Democratic Party ahead of the 2026 midterms. His name is already being tested in GOP attack messaging in some of the so-called swing states that decided the election in 2024. But Democrats say his win reflects that they have a broad coalition. You saw moderates win in Virginia and New Jersey, in Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill. And now you saw Mamdani, who's a very progressive Democratic Socialist, win the mayorship in the largest city, New York.
Right. So it sounds like his win is more than just demographics. It reflects something deeper than that. But let's broaden to a bigger picture, Professor Min. So President Trump has pointed to the latest results as it's due to the ongoing federal shutdown as the reason for the loss. In your view, what are the driving forces behind the Democrats' strong show in the elections?
Yeah, first of all, I also think that the government shutdown affected the victory of the Democratic Party in their three elections, especially as Chris mentioned, there are many government employees living in Virginia, and they had a direct impact from the shutdown. And people blamed the White House and Republicans for the shutdown more than Democrats, and therefore the shutdown contributed to the Democratic victory in the elections. And meanwhile, it was reported that the elections were seen as a mini midterm evaluation of the Trump administration. So many people believe that it was an assessment of Trump government's economic policies, particularly the high cost of living caused by tariffs. So as you remember, the high cost of living or inflation in the United States played a major role in President Trump's victory last year. And so the high inflation resulted from the huge amount of money spread out to the public to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic. And the Biden government's efforts to control the inflation failed to achieve the desired outcome and eventually resulted in Trump's victory. So the high cost of living was the main factor that brought Trump back into the White House, but it is now holding him back. So, but there's still 1 year to go before the midterm election next year. So I think there is sufficient time for voters to change their assessments of the U.S. economy. So the economic situation in the first half of next year will have a significant impact on the outcome of the midterm elections next year.
So we'll have to keep close tabs on the economic situation in the U.S. until that time. Now, as we speak of the government shutdown, which has stretched for nearly 40 days and it's now finally entering its final stages, Chris, tell us, what kind of impact has it had so far, and what changes have people actually been feeling on the ground?
Well, the shutdown is now in its 6th week, and even though a deal is reportedly near, there's been a lot of damage. Roughly 750,000 federal workers have gone without pay for almost 40 days, and many have turned to standing in line at food banks, gig work, and emergency assistance just to keep their households afloat. Now, air travel has been hit particularly hard. The Federal Aviation Administration ordered airlines to reduce domestic flights by up to 10% due to staffing shortages and people calling in sick because they simply haven't been getting paid. On one day alone last week, more than 2,100 flights were canceled. So this had threatened to really impact the busy travel season coming up, the holiday travel season coming up, with Thanksgiving, the holiday in just a couple of weeks, and Christmas several weeks later, which is when air travel will be at its highest. Now, essential services in the U.S. were also disrupted. Passport processing, national parks were closed, food safety inspections had been going on, and housing assistance payments slowed or halted. And supplemental nutritional assistance programs, food assistance, came dangerously close to running out, putting a lot of pressure on lower income families. Now, the shutdown has cost the economy, according to economists, an estimated $12 to $14 billion, with lost productivity and delayed government contracts adding up fast. And on the ground, frustration is widespread. Public sector workers say that morale is at a breaking point because they haven't been getting paid this entire time, and many say that the fallout will be felt long after the government reopens.
Right, so 6 weeks, it's a very long period, and the people must have felt this effects in their daily lives as well. So what were actually the key issues at the heart of this shutdown, Chris? And also tell us what brought about this unexpected turnaround, just as many feared it could drag on even longer.
Yeah, it came down to a battle over healthcare, specifically tax credits related to the Affordable Care Act, which is known as Obamacare. Republicans wanted a clean bill, clean continuing resolution to reopen the government with no strings attached. The Democrats insisted on guarantees, those healthcare tax credit, funding for SNAP, which we talked about earlier, which provides monthly grocery buddies to more than 41 million low-income Americans, including children, seniors, and people with disabilities. So what changed? Public frustration started to grow, especially as flights were canceled and benefit programs were canceled, specifically STIP. And now polls showed that Republicans were taking more of the blame for the shutdown, even though they still control Congress. And the private sector, including airlines and small business coalitions, began urging lawmakers to end the standoff. So late last night, Senate leaders struck a tentative bipartisan deal that would reopen the government for 45 days, fund back pay for those federal workers, and postpone some of the debate on policy fights like healthcare. But Senate Majority Leader John Thune has promised to hold a vote on those Affordable Care Act subsidies in the second week of December. So the bottom line is the shutdown may be ending, but issues that have caused it haven't gone away. Expect another clash next month if this 45-day measure to reopen the government actually gets the votes and passes today like it's expected.
Right, so those underlying issues are still remaining at the situation. And some people, in fact, say this latest budget deadlock is just not part, it's actually a bigger part of a political strategy heading into next year's midterms. Professor Min, how do you see the latest situation on the shutdown?
Yes, I also see the situation that it's like a political power struggle before the next year's midterm elections. Personally, I think that the results of the 2026 midterm elections will have a significant impact on President Trump's future governance. So if the Republican Party wins the elections and maintains its majority in both houses of Congress, it will bolster the political efforts of Trump administration in its second half of the term. So in particular, the Republican Party is expected to continue its role as a key political ally of President Trump through its legislative support for main policy agendas. Meanwhile, if the opposition Democrat Party wins and controls both houses of Congress or gains a majority in either the Senate or the House, it is expected that it will focus its energies on blocking the passage of key bills to prevent the White House and the Republican Party from regaining power in 2028. So Trump government will likely face difficulties in passing key policy legislations during the remaining term in office. In addition, a victory in the midterm elections is expected to provide the Democratic Party with the momentum to politically revitalize itself and consolidate its supporters. So it will be like a great turning point for the opposition, the Democratic Party. So for both parties, the midterm elections will be a very, very important event.
Definitely. So beyond the budget, it sounds like political positioning was a big part of the story here. Now, some observers actually say that the latest defeat could mark the beginning of a, quote, lame duck period for President Trump. Chris, what's the actual mood like inside Washington?
Well, obviously, Democrats and Republicans feel differently about the election results. And the mood, I expect the mood to lighten up a bit as federal workers get back to work as a result of this temporary deal to reopen the government. Now, Trump wasn't on the ballot last Tuesday, and that mattered because turnout dropped among the so-called low-propensity voters who only seem to show up when Trump's name is at the top of the ballot. Now, inside Washington, nerves are rising because of these results, even though Republicans still control Congress. And some Republican Party leaders are questioning whether Trump helps or hurts the GOP in non-presidential cycles like these off-year elections in 2025 and the midterm elections that will decide control of Congress next year in 2026. Meanwhile, the results seem to show that Democrats are gaining energy in the suburbs with women, Hispanic voters, and younger voters showing up in force. There was wide interest on the Democratic side of the ballot, and some of these voters are the ones who swung toward Trump last fall in 2024 and allowed him to sweep the so-called 7 battleground states and have a clear electoral victory last November. Now, to shift the spotlight, Republicans want to make Zohran Mamdani, new mayor of New York City, the face of the Democratic Party, framing him as the sign of a party that's moving too far left. Now, the bottom line is Trump's hold on the GOP is intact, and the party still holds Congress. But these election results may indicate that his political magic might not be transferable. So whether he's a lame duck or not, that's up for debate. But, the Republican Party is so tied to Donald Trump that rightly questions are being asked about its future after Trump, since he won't be able to run for election in the next presidential election in 2028.
Right. So something certain is that the results actually dealt a big blow to President Trump, especially with his approval rate dropping to 37%, the lowest since his second term began. So, Professor Min, do you think we'll be able to see some changes in how President Trump will approach this from now on?
Yes, I think so. Personally, I think that President Trump will try to stabilize U.S. economy throughout the next year to win the midterm elections. Since the inauguration, President Trump and the Trump government has revitalized its America First trade policy to reduce the U.S. trade deficits and revitalize U.S. manufacturing capabilities by aggressively imposing tariffs to the entire world. Specifically, Trump government imposed reciprocal tariffs to the global community and initiated its trade negotiations with the major trading partners such as China, Japan, and South Korea. And such trade negotiations last several months, and came to an end in early November. And President Trump called it a huge victory for America and argued that he established a new framework for fair trade. And based on the political achievements, I think Trump government will try to favorably manage its relations with the major trading partners next year. And it will also try to enhance each cooperation with those trading and technological partners to increase high-paying jobs in the U.S. and restore its manufacturing capabilities in order to secure victories in the midterm elections. So I expect that next year will be a kind of stabilizing period of time for President Trump.
So we'll be able to see some changes moving forward. As of now, we'll have to conclude our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Min.
Thank you.
And of course, Chris, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you again.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.